So, ma'am, it's 3, 2, 1. We are live now.
Thank you. Very good evening to all. Thank you for joining us on the session of current status of drug therapy in COVID-19. I, Dr. Monica Chinda from the Medical Affairs Lupin, welcome you for the session. COVID-19 is the ongoing pandemic which started as an outbreak in China in December 2019. It has rapidly spread over the entire world and becoming a big concern. The emergency that the people face today demands the development of new drugs, and there are many repurposed drugs as well. So going forward, there are hundreds of CTs which are going on and we are awaiting the results. So let us today understand from our panelists, from our special doctors, what is the current status of the drug therapy in COVID-19. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Professor R. Narasimhan. He's a MD, FRCP, FRG, FRCCP, the Senior Respiratory Physician at Apollo Hospital, Chennai. Sir is a Chairman at Respiratory Research Foundation of India. I welcome you, sir. Kindly please take over the session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Monica. It's a matter of great pleasure that we are doing this session on behalf of Respiratory Research Foundation of India and in association with Lupin. The reason why I thought upon this topic was there are too many drugs available now. The first wave of the pandemic, we did not have any drugs. We knew nothing about the drugs, and we're just clutching at stocks. We don't know what to do with it, and whatever drug came about, we started using it and started trying it. Some of them were extrapolated from HIV, some were extrapolated from rheumatoid arthritis. And the second wave, when it came, we're not kind of afraid because we know a lot of drugs are available. But the only thing is, they are being used left, right, and center. To get some clarity and concept among ourselves and also to the treating physicians, and also if there anybody who is watching this program, we thought we'd hit upon this topic of the current status of treatment in COVID, from chloroquine to colchicine, and also some of the surgical aspects as to whether when the patient can be taken up for surgery, whether patients should be denied surgery because of corona. To talk about that, we also included one thoracic surgeon in our panel. So to discuss and carry forward this panel discussion or an interactive session, I have with me my two dear students who have become consultants in their own right. And Dr. Sridhar is a gold medalist in DTCD from and also DNB from respiratory medicine. He's a fellow of the interventional pulmonology from Apollo Hospital. He's one of my very good students and registrars, and now a consultant in his own right. And also we have with us Dr. Amal Johnson, who is my associate in the department, who helps me in all my work and interventions. And with us also the thoracic surgeon, Dr. Ajay Narasimhan, who works in tandem with our, whether it is a COVID-related or a non-COVID-related surgical problems, also to chip in some of his thoughts and ideas in COVID management. So the format of the meeting would be in the form of an interactive session. There would not be any great didactic talks. It will be more of an interactive session. A slide will be shown. All of us will discuss. And if anyone in the audience has any question, we can just pop it in the chat box, which should be answered at the end of the session. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A session at the end of the session. So having said that, I thought we must first start with the chloroquine, one of the age-old drug that was used for malaria. And someone mentioned that chloroquine can be used, and we all know how all it happened when Trump said he told India that they must supply chloroquine to US at any cost, or they'll face the consequences. And we all thought we had conquered corona. We thought India will be the first to conquer the corona. All kinds of things came about at that point of time. And after that, a lot of things came, and even the company that was making chloroquine itself said it is of no use to us. And you have some data on that, Amal? Do you have any
Yeah, sure, sir.
slides on that?
Sure, sir,
Yeah,
sure,
you
sir.
can just share that slide on it, and we all can have a discussion on that.
I'm
how
able to
it,
share the slides now, sir. Can I share the slides now?
Yeah, you share the slide. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, sir. Can you see it now, sir?
Yeah, I can see it.
Evening,
Go to
sir.
the next slide. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Yeah, such an honor. Like previously you said now, sir. Like next slide. Not able to move to next slide.
Sir, you can click on the slide. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
you can flip,
Yeah,
play it
sure.
yourself.
now
Yeah.
it's-
Yeah.
As you
This
said, sir,
thing,
there
Amal,
is a
just hold on.
significant.
Amal,
Yes,
just hold on here.
yeah,
This
sure.
is one typical prescription which we see nowadays.
Yeah.
A patient of mild COVID coming to us with 16 drugs.
Terrible.
This
This
patient
patient
got
was on
admitted.
Rumat, sir. This patient was on Rumat.
This patient is
Patient-
a mild COVID patient who was admitted and given these drugs in the hospital. He left that hospital and got admitted in another hospital, not because of COVID, but because of the side effects. This is just to stress home the point that polypharmacy has become the order of the day in COVID. Anyone can write anything. That's what is actually happening in some of the places where I would not blame anybody because people are afraid, doctors are afraid, everyone is afraid, and the direction as to how one has with the ideas and concepts and the good things and the bad things about the drugs is not being spread the way it has to be spread. It is actually a reverse pyramid. The doctor who knows a lot of knowledge and who knows the science does not spread it to the person, to the patient, and also to the media. The message does not percolate down to the people who really matter. The policymakers are not discussing with the doctors, and that message is not going down. But the message of wrong things and the remdesivir shortage and tocilizumab, all these things are projected in the media, and the media has become a very big thing. So most of the doctors are not aware that certain of the drugs. I don't think doctors want to do a harm by prescribing so many drugs to the patient. This is being prescribed in the hope that one of them would work on these patients. This is just an example of how polypharmacy is going on in COVID-19 management. We go to the next slide, Amal,
Exactly, sir.
about the chloroquine. Yeah.
So so far in the management of these infections, so around 500 drugs have been studied, sir, including antivirals, cell-based components, antibodies, and so on and so forth, etc. So the first drug which was proposed to be in the management of this infection was chloroquine HCQS. So the proposed mechanism of action, what it kind of inhibits the phagolysosome fusion. It kind of inhibits the binding of the virus to the cell wall. Now the based on the two trials, solid trials in this are solidarity trial, and the second one is the study of recovery trial. So in the solidarity trial, we were based on 4 arms. The first arm was HCQS. Second arm was anti-HIV drugs, lopinavir, ritonavir. Third arm included 2 drugs, lopinavir, ritonavir, along with interferon beta, and the fourth arm was remdesivir. The final outcome of this study was that all the 4 arms did not have any significant effect on hospitalization. It did not have any significant effect on the mortality, did not have any effect on the ventilation also. And the second trial, recovery trial, it has been properly abbreviated as randomized evaluation of COVID-19 therapy. So it is a proper trial, sir, open label trial, RCT trial, with over 12,000 participants. Even in this study, HCQS did not decrease the need of ventilation, did not decrease the duration of hospitalization, and did not decrease the mortality also. So subsequently, now the present recommendation, treatment recommendation is now this drug is not been recommended for treatment, pre-exposure prophylaxis, and also post-exposure prophylaxis. Now this drug has been taken away from June 5th, 2020, sir. And it is and the important thing is it is associated with significant side effects, sir. The most important being QTC prolongation.
Yeah. So what is next slide you can go to? So the highlight of this chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, is that it is a drug which is of no use at all, and it is a drug which was suggested as a prophylactic by some of the organizations. Some of the doctors themselves started stocking it and started using it, and we did lose some of our doctor friends because of cardiac arrhythmias. So after a lot of deliberations, chloroquine was removed from the trial. In that 4-arm trial, chloroquine was removed, and only the other 3 ones. So it has been proven that it does not have any evidence to say that it helps. So chloroquine is out. Can we go on to the next one?
Yeah, sure, sir. Sure, sir. The second list is azithromycin.
Yeah,
this
is one drug. This is one drug which I think is being misused by most of us. Actually, azithromycin, people thought that it will be anti-COVID, and this also has a tendency to cause acuity prolongation in people who have this coronary artery problems, and that also can cause a lot of problems. So azithromycin also had to
be given in combination with hydroxychloroquine.
And that was much widely. There was a study combination.
That was a study done by first study is an RCT from Brazil. In that study, they shown that the combination of hydroxychloroquine did not prove to be beneficial at all. On the contrary, it only produced side effects.
Yeah.
The second second solid solid evidence was the trial from recovery trial. So far in the 6 months of the trial, the study result was it's not proven to be beneficial at all, and was taken from use from 14th December 2020.
So azithromycin is no longer in our list. So chloroquine is out. Azithromycin is out. Azithromycin you want to throw any light here?
Yes, sir. Azithromycin is not at all for any antiviral in this anti-COVID. Most of them are using for preventing bacterial infection, but very early they are starting. So it's no benefit at all. That's what.
The proposed mechanism of
you have raised a very good point, Sridhar. That's an excellent point which you have raised. This doesn't have an antiviral property. So the antiviral properties, which I think as we go down, we'll see that the antiviral drugs are to be started in the first initial phase only. The later you start, like you rightly said, it has got no role at all. So that I think we'll be discussing in the next. And second point that you have raised is the bacterial infection. It has been proven that in the early phase of the COVID infection, you do not get the bacterial infections with frequency. So there is no role at all for these azithromycins and doxycyclines and so on. In the early phase of the COVID, when you, like rightly said, on day 1, when you RT-PCR is positive, you start them on azithromycin. It absolutely has got no role at all. And even the trials which have proven very clearly that the chloroquines or the azithromycins have got no role in the management of the COVID.
The proposed mechanism was probably immunomodulatory actions.
Yeah.
Rather than anything.
Sridhar?
Yes, a secondary bacterial infection is not common in COVID as common in influenza. Influenza more common bacterial pneumonias, but COVID the studies are not very common. Only the fungal infections are more common rather than
that's
bacterial.
One of the major difference between a swine flu and the COVID. In swine flu, bacterial infections occurs with greater frequency. So there is a role for antibiotics right from the day 1. Unlike in COVID, where bacterial infections are rare. they come into picture only in the category C of the COVID severe category. Only you start getting bacterial infections where you have to think of higher generation antibiotics. Yeah. Next slide.
And with
What is
that,
the-
my doubt is whether the bacterial infections are a result of the COVID per se or as a result of the drug therapy for COVID because
No
of the
compromise state.
steroids.
If
All,
COVID
sir,
per
both
se,
drugs and COVID per se. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
see, in the COVID, what happens is COVID has to be divided into two important phases. The first phase is a viremic phase, where in this viremic phase, one does not see any bacterial infection, but only sees viremia and lung infection, some upper respiratory tract, and some patches, GGOs and C. And after the first 10 days, majority of the people recover within this 10 days. More than 85 to 90% will recover within this first 10 days. After 10 days, when the inflammation persists for a longer period, the inflammation that occurs in COVID is disjointed and dysregulated inflammation. This inflammation releases a lot of active proteins like C-reactive proteins and IL-6, nothing. They're all immunosuppressant. They are the ones that make the person prone for a secondary infection. This usually happens in category C. It doesn't happen in category 1 or 2 or category A or B. The COVID per se does not but the effect of COVID that occurs in the post 10 days of this in COVID is the one that causes the major problem.
So not the drug therapy alone. I think that is an important
To
point.
some
No, sir.
extent,
No, sir.
drug therapy also contributes to that because some of these monoclonal antibodies, in combination with azithromycin and doxy, can make people prone for fungal infections. Antibiotics, they can go and suppress this thing as a whole, and they also can make the. That's one of the reasons why we are very much afraid of the fungal infections which are likely to get because of the overuse of antibiotics and also the steroids, which we are going to discuss as we go down.
Steroids.
And
Yes, sir.
sugar is also dysregulated by even by
Yeah.
COVID as well and steroid. COVID
Yeah.
per
Steroid.
se is dysregulating the
So
sugar
that again
level.
causes a vicious cycle, I think, predisposes
sir.
the patient to fungal and serious bacterial.
Yes, sir.
So shall I move, sir, to the
So keep
Yes.
moving, keep moving.
Yeah.
So
lopinavir
again,
ritonavir, sir,
I think we
anti-HIV
move
drug.
forwards this also because, as I said, we took some from the HIV2, the lopinavir and ritonavir. They were in the one of the forearm study, and that was also proven to be
Did
useless.
not
So we should
prove to
not
be
use
beneficial at all.
lopinavir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, ritonavir should not use at all. Next.
It was taken from use in 29 June 2020. And next is ivermectin, sir.
I think here we must stop for a while. Sridhar, you were telling something about ivermectin. What's your thoughts on ivermectin?
Yes, sir. Ivermectin, actually, the recent RCT from Colombia said there is no benefit from ivermectin in mild cases. But the Young's guidelines and they are recommending, many guidelines are recommending. Based on yesterday, American Journal of Therapeutics, in that there was a meta-analysis. In that there were 18 RCTs was favoring for the ivermectin. But I don't know what happened. They have withdrawn the study from that. So far, ivermectin, there is no conclusion whether it's beneficial or not beneficial. Some studies are supporting, some studies have said absolutely no benefit. But ivermectin, mainly it's chip into the COVID management, mainly because of steroids. Whenever we use a high dose of steroids for long days, there is a chance of strangulation. So to prevent that only, usually whenever we use steroids, we'll use ivermectin. Otherwise, whether it has really antiviral property.
To produce an antiviral property, the particular dose of ivermectin
dose should be
significantly high,
used.
sir.
Yes, 5 times 10.
Significantly higher.
Doses, that's what
Almost 100 times more.
That dose can be used in humans. That's what the studies have told.
Yeah.
But no studies, proper studies have suggested any benefits. There are big RCT from Colombia that they used 0.3 mg per kg ivermectin that showed no improvement, no benefit.
On the same doses used on humans, it was not proven to be beneficial at all, sir.
Yeah. So there is no evidence, sufficient evidence to say that ivermectin is quite beneficial as an antiviral.
And it is okay, sir. And it is also associated with side effects, gastrointestinal side effects, neurological psychiatric side effects, teratogenic effects are also there.
Yeah.
So,
So far, we have removed azithromycin, we have removed chloroquine, we have removed ivermectin. Yeah. Next.
ivermectin also, yes, sir. Nitrous oxygenate, sir.
I think
So
this
there
is
is only
this is a very small study, randomized control, and it has been
there
proven
is
to be.
only one trial, sir. This is a single RCT is only there available. It may decrease. The study say that it may work in mild patients when they are presenting significantly early, but not late.
Yeah.
So broad spectrum antiparasitic drug. So at present they are trying to extrapolate it.
Right.
So the next in line is favipiravir.
Yeah.
Favipiravir was brought in as a drug which was significantly indicated in patient with mild to moderate patient. So, and the proposed mechanism of action was it will decrease the viral polymerase. The dosage was 1800 milligram BD, stat dose followed by 800 milligram BD for subsequent 2 weeks. And it comes with a study done by this IQ et al. This study has some problems. It was not a controlled study, sir. And it was done only in mild patients who would subsequently require anyway. And the study outcomes was only fever resolution and serological conversion rather than oxygenation, ventilation, mortality. They didn't include those. Only the fever conversion and the serological conversion was taken as study outcomes. I think that is a major limitation of the study.
Yeah, I must add here that favipiravir came with a big bang, because when it came into the market, there was a very big hope on this drug, because that was the only antiviral drug that was available during that period. Came with a bang. Lot of studies were done. The Mumbai people did a study. Udwani and all were involved in that study, and the study did show some benefit in telling that it can prevent from mild, moderate cases. But as you rightly pointed out, that none of the studies were powered enough to say that. They were not randomized control studies, and even in the preprint form, there were a lot of criticism of the study, and it also caused a lot of side effects.
Side effects also, sir.
Conclusion that they drawn upon
Hyperuricemia.
was this favipiravir drug has to undergo some more studies, some more the data is needed to say whether this favipiravir will be useful or not. Until such time,
And
it has-
favipiravir is contraindicated in pregnancy,
yeah.
CKD, CLD patients.
So that's the reason why favipiravir nowadays is not finding a place in many of the guidelines. So favipiravir also is out. Yeah, can I have the next slide?
Favipiravir is
please?
out. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. So
Yeah.
now the
Interferons. So now
interferon.
some talk about the interferons.
Interferon
but,
was primarily one of the arms in
One minute.
solidarity trial.
This solidarity trial has proved that interferon is effective, but there are some studies which have said that it is of some use. I think our country is coming out with another drug, but wherein the data does not prove it. There is not sufficient data on that. The solidarity trial, what does it say, Amal, on the interferon?
Solidarity trial did not decrease mortality,
Yeah, the 28-day mortality was not decreased at all by the solidarity trial.
oxygenation,
Yeah.
hospitalization also.
So both these alpha and beta interferons were not proven to be of any great use in the management of COVID. Yeah, can I have the next way? But I must make a mention here, most of these drugs are to be used only in the mild to moderate COVIDs only, right? Okay.
Interferon was tried in severe patients, sir, but it was significantly associated with side effects, immunosuppression,
Yeah.
serious infections. Steroids, sir. So the steroid recommendation came in on the basis of recovery trial. So previously, steroids were not recommended when there is a viral pneumonia, because there was a proposed mechanism that steroids will decrease the clinical status delay the viral clearance, and also it is associated with side effects, adverse events like secondary bacterial infection. Now, the preliminary evidence for this steroids came into it was, month of March 2020, and there was an observation in the state's hospital, Henry Ford Hospital, that patients treated with methylprednisolone significantly improved within few days. And based on those study results, the subsequent trial came, the recovery trial came, and it was published in 22nd June 2020 that dexamethasone of 6 milligram OD intravenous for 10 days decreased mortality by
Wait a minute,
Uh,
Sridhar, your
yes, sir.
experience on steroids in very mild cases, what's your thought on that?
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm not using for the mild cases, sir. Only for the those who are falling saturation below 94 only recommending, sir. Most of them are initiating on mild cases, but they are most of them are ending up with some fungal or infections, or their sugars are going up. They are getting admitted. Maybe that admission and their sugar levels may be controlled without steroids. They may recover without steroids. That's what I thought. Because this recovery trial, all this is only hospitalized patients, not on any mild cases. This all this trial. So far, the no studies have uh, advised oral steroids in mild cases. Only and the hospitalized patient, those who have hypoxia only, it's beneficial.
exactly,
That's
sir.
what all the studies. But most of them,
Hospitalization.
last time, many were not using oral steroids. But this time, almost many practitioners are
Yeah,
using that.
I have one question regarding that.
Yes,
Sridhar,
sir.
your point, I agree to your point, but what happens is, I don't know about the bigger hospitals. In the small hospitals where they are treating COVID, even persistent cough is seen as an indication to start steroid. Is it true? Is it really beneficial when the patient has cough? Definitely, it's going to suppress the cough, but is it actually the right management, or we should wait it out till the patient develops hypoxia, or early steroids is more beneficial? That is my question, because people also they have a very low threshold to start steroids in this wave, if I'm
Yes.
right.
Recently, the AIMS guidelines has updated, sir, in the May first week. They have suggested steroids from the mild cases, old steroid, when there is a persistent of fever and symptoms more than 10 days, and there is an increase in the CRP level, they have suggested. They said more than 7 days of fever. In that case, they have recommended. I don't know based on what they have recommended, but in the guidelines chart, it was there. After that, only many have started using that.
NIH treatment guidelines clearly mentioned that patients who are on
Hypoxia only.
hypoxic
Only.
patients only should receive oxygen.
Yes.
Should receive
They
steroids.
mentioned both the inhaled budesonide also. They more than 5 days. They mentioned if the symptom is persistent more than 5 days, they advise to use oral steroid. The previous last month before May first week, they have not mentioned oral steroid, but May 3rd they updated the guideline. In that they have mentioned oral steroids if there is a fever persists more than 7 days. Moreover, this time many patients are having the longer duration of fever. The last time 3 days, 5 days only, but this time most of the patients are complaining fever for more than 7 days.
Yeah. Yeah, that will
And
come.
also,
Steroids, actually, like you were asking that question of that, I think Sridhar answered that, no? Any symptomatic COVID, see, you can divide the mild COVID and moderate COVID also into symptomatic and asymptomatic COVIDs, no? You do come across symptomatic COVIDs. He is mild, he is coughing, but his saturation is okay. He's saturating on 92, 94, he is saturating, but his persistent cough he has got. Such patients, there is a justification for low dose steroids for such patients.
Even when
Especially
the
if you're
markers are normal and all that.
even though
on
the
normal.
markets are normal. There, I think what it does is to address to the bronchospasm it addresses,
bronchospasm
and also that's likely to maybe the inflammatory cascade which is likely to start whether it prevents or not with it. But the data does not support using steroids in early case where there are no symptoms at all. The guidelines of AMS says that you can start these patients only when they are symptomatic, either in the form of a fever or in the form of a cough, or if he's becoming breathless. It's not necessary he has to be hospitalized. If he gets hospitalized, it's a different steroid to use. But when he is symptomatic outpatient management, there is a role, but that's a very gray area. So one has to be extremely careful, because if these patients are diabetics, starting these patients on steroids with COVID itself can cause glucose metabolism abnormalities. The steroid itself can cause abnormal glucose levels. You can make them prone for a infection. Maybe he'll come back with an infection after 3 or 4 weeks. They may come back with a bigger infection.
Which will be the
So this
preferred
aspect
steroid?
has to be remembered when we are starting these patients on steroids. In the late onset steroids, how much do you give, Sridhar? What's your testing on that? Suppose if you see the patient on, he's hospitalized on day 5 or day 6, he's hospitalized, and what's your choice in such situations? How do you go about with steroids?
Is in hypoxic patients you are asking, sir?
Yeah.
Patient is hypoxic. I'm starting on methylprednisolone only, sir. I'm preferring methylprednisolone. If it is like only hypoxia, not on NIV or not on HFNC, just basic nasal prawns or minimal less than 6 liters of oxygen requirement, then I'm starting on only 40 mg, 60 mg only, sir. So if it is
Is it
80
a
mg,
preference, sir?
maximum 80 mg I'm going. Not more than that. Many are using pulse steroids, sir. 125 to 50 for 5 days, but I'm not convinced with that, sir. I
I don't
was
think it is
starting.
right to use pulse steroids in patients with COVID, because you're going to push up. Because the trials have said only dexamethasone as the drug of choice in COVID. That too, dexamethasone in a dose of 6 milligrams. So you think of, you have raised a very good point. One of my friend in Mayo, what he does is, steroid is considered as an equivalent of tocilizumab. So when the patient is severely hypoxic, and you don't have a tocilizumab access in such patients, these people in Mayo, what they are doing is they are starting these patients on 20 milligrams of dexamethasone for 5 days, and then taper it very fast in a matter of, by 10 days he is out of the steroids. This is for patients who are extremely hypoxic and in whom you think tocilizumab would help. That is the people who have, within 24 hours they start worsening. You see them worsening very fast right under your nose. Such patients are candidates for tocilizumab, but tocilizumab is a shortage across the world. There is a shortage and it's being commanded by the governments. So in such situations, if we are not able to get there is a role for a high dose of steroid. Otherwise, the routine hypoxia, that is, you admit a COVID patient into the wards, he deteriorates, you shift him to the COVID ICU, and in that situation, the role for a high dose steroids is not there. I think there is a role only for a dexamethasone of 6 milligrams. That's what the most of the study of our recovery trial. You have the data, Amal, with you?
Yeah, sure, sir. So the thing is, according to the trial results, sir, so dexamethasone 6 milligram single dose OD for 10 days decreased the mortality by 1/3 patients were on ventilator, and decreased mortality by 1/5 patients were on oxygen therapy. But the study had certain limitations, sir, because the patients who are on the 20th day of admission, they were still on oxygen, and the study did not show what was done to those patients. That is the first limitation. And the second limitation, patients who are mild symptoms who did not require oxygen, there was a significant increase in the almost 52% increase in the mortality.
Your mic is not good, Amal. Yeah.
Your mic, we are not able to hear you.
Audible
we
now,
are not
sir?
able to hear
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Audible,
Now you
sir?
are. Now you
Yeah.
are.
Now you are audible.
So the patients who did not require oxygen, so there was a 22% increase in the mortality levels. So that is bringing to the question again: should the steroids be prescribed to patients who are having mild symptoms?
I
Which is
think that
your
is
preferred steroid, sir? Which is your preferred?
Steroids have got no role in mild COVID patients. That's the reason why there is one trial that is on an ongoing trial, whether it is a high dose steroids is useful or not.
Yes,
Until
sir.
the data comes out, we should not start giving
16
high
milligram
dose
versus 8
steroids to
milligram.
these patients. 6 mg twice a day we should not give it. As I said, Mayo has said that these are all experimental decision on a trial basis. They call it as on a trial. They are tried as a trial with 20 milligram dose for 5 days. This is a very clear-cut indication where you think tocilizumab would have helped, but you don't have a tocilizumab. There you can give steroids in such a high dosage, and within a matter of 10 days you can do that. And they have found a very good response in these patients actually. Otherwise, the recovery trial said only 6 milligrams of injectable dexamethasone where it has been found to be useful. So the point that we should understand here with regards to steroids is steroids are very good drugs and they are also harmful drugs. Harmful drugs because if you start steroids on a very mild patients, you are making them prone for a people who is not a diabetic might become a diabetic, or people who are diabetics might worsen, have their sugar status abnormal and may need to go for a higher dose and also be prone for infections and other problems and so on. And a good drug because if you start it early enough, it can take care of the inflammation in a very good manner because that's what the trial is all about. It said dexamethasone is a wonderful drug. I think it came in a lot of papers. It was flashed. A wonderful drug, a simple drug like a dexamethasone. That's headlines was Hindu, if I remember. A simple drug like dexamethasone has been proven to be a wonderful drug for COVID. So it means steroid is a good drug. You got to be careful in choosing mild cases, and you got to be very careful in choosing severe cases on the dosages also. We should be very important about it. Yeah, can I have the next slide?
Yeah, sure,
Sir, one more thing I want to clear here, sir. Inhaled steroids. Many are asking about that. When the patient became positive, first day itself they want to start on budesonide. Now because budesonide has been recommended in mild cases, but the budesonide role is mostly for the, like you said, if they have persistent cough, the bronchospasm, all this, or it can be used very early, sir, mild cases, but it's not very common whether it's required.
I think the budesonide part will be coming in the
Yes, sir.
I
In
think
the
another 4 or
subsequent
5
slides,
slides
yes, sir.
down the lane we
Oh,
have that
okay.
discussion
Separately,
on the budesonide trial.
Okay. And we
Because
have a
lots of
discussion now on the
ifs and buts are there on that budesonide trial actually. Because the way the budesonide came into the market and most of the budesonide inhalers flew off the shelf, many people started buying and stocking the budesonide in our country. So whether it has to be used in a mild case is a debate. I think that we'll discuss
in
about
the
it.
subsequent slides will come, yes, sir.
The
Okay.
discussion will be more political than medical.
Yeah.
They don't know.
The next.
That is always, yes, sir.
Vitamins.
And
Vitamins, I must tell you, it's a multi-billion-dollar business actually. I don't think all vitamins, vitamin D,
again,
C,
political,
zinc,
sir.
lot of people are
Ajay, sir,
coming
again,
and,
political.
Yeah.
So
Political again. Yes.
yeah, vitamins actually they are not harmful. So if you classify the COVID drugs into useful drugs, not useful drugs, not harmful and harmful, vitamins will come under the not harmful drugs. They don't cause
Not
any direct benefit to anything, but it can be given, that's all. But it does not give any anti-COVID properties to anybody. I have seen some of my patients talking of zinc for years together, and one of my relatives is taking zinc for the past 1.5 years. From the time the COVID started, paper came that zinc is useful. He's taking zinc on a daily basis. He's taking zinc. I don't think we should spend much time on these vitamins because they are not very useful drugs. We'll go on to the
Yes,
next
sir.
slide.
In the prophylaxis also and in the treatment also, sir.
No, it's of no use at all. Yeah,
Yes.
harmless drug it is actually. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
remdesivir,
Remdesivir.
important drug. Yes,
Remdesivir.
let us hear the experience from another tertiary. What Sridhar, what's your experience in your hospital with remdesivir? How were you using it before and how are you using it now? That's what I just want to know. Because there is so much of this thing about remdesivir,
People are
Patient
queuing
knows
up
about
in.
remdesivir. Pharma people know about remdesivir. Patients themselves will call and ask me. The other day, Ajay was telling, people have started buying everything across the counter. They buy remdesivir and stock. They buy oxygen and stock.
Concentrators,
They
they buy
can't do is to
ventilators.
kidnap a doctor. Everything else they can do.
Remdesivir still, I am on same stand only, sir. What we used in Apollo under you, that only the hypoxia, the patient getting less than 94, then only I'm starting Remdesivir just for 5 days. Previously, we were using for some patients 10 days, sir. It showed good there, but afterwards, many are again for 10 days. So I'm using for 5 days. The same thing, 94. Once the patient get admitted with hypoxia, starting on remdesivir along with steroid and anticoagulation. That combo, triple combo. Only mainly I'm using, sir. Without hypoxia, even for the high risk cases, I'm not using, sir.
Yeah.
That's what we followed there. That's the same thing I'm continuing in this episode, the time second wave.
That is the treatment guideline also is same, sir, actually, regarding remdesivir.
In the first wave, we know, Sridhar, when we were using remdesivir, across the world, the experience is same. They were using remdesivir for 5 days. When they start, then some people did not respond to the remdesivir. They gave for another 5 because it was all part of the trial only it was going on. Some patients were given extended dose of remdesivir for another 5 days. And then when the trial results came, they compared the results between the 5 days remdesivir and 10 days remdesivir. They found there was no extra mortality benefit in this patient. That's why they are now given up. The second wave, we are very clear cut with regards to first wave. Remdesivir is the only drug that was available. So we were giving it for all these patients. And then we also realized in the remdesivir, these studies, the ACT1 study said, if the patient is severe, like you rightly said, if the patient has a severe, is damaged, he's on a ventilator, he's on a NIV, he's on so many other things, their remdesivir is of no use because, as I said, you must classify this. This is come into the COVID armamentarium because of its antiviral property. It was used for Ebola virus. After that, we thought we could also use it for it, and we found its good use in many patients. The Chinese study and a lot of other studies have proved of good use. But in the randomized control study, they found using it beyond 5 days is of no use. Or if the patient is on a ventilator, it is of no use. Which means my first statement that you must classify this into 2 phases. One is a viremic phase, other is an inflammatory phase. If in the viremic phase you are catching, the patient is breathless, dyspneic, hypoxic, is becoming dropping down his saturation. That's the time for us to start the patients on remdesivir. Not on day one when you see him,
Yes, sir.
when he does not need a remdesivir. Not when the patient is ventilated or shifted from some other hospital to a hospital on a ventilator or
Yes,
on
sir.
a NIV.
That is it.
Then I
Yes.
don't think there is any
Yeah,
role for
within one
Exactly,
week
sir.
of
remdesivir in that.
onset of symptom, patient becoming hypoxic, then there is a role. If
Definite role
patient,
for it.
yeah, if this patient that like you said, if after 10 days again patient became hypoxic, all this is due to various reasons. Yes,
There is
viral.
not just got no role at all. So remdesivir, I think why I spend so much time on remdesivir is there is a big clamor for remdesivir among the patients and also among some of the physicians too. Remdesivir, they want it. At any cost, remdesivir, stop the remdesivir and so on. I don't think one need to give so much of importance to it because 80% of the patients of the COVID, 80 to 90%, I will say, are all very mild asymptomatic COVIDs or mild symptomatic COVIDs who can be handled at home itself. And these patients need not be told about this remdesivir and so on. And it's, I think, the media that is projecting it in such a big manner about remdesivir, so they keep talking it. I think we must stress home the point that remdesivir is not the be all and end all of COVID management.
The
Remdesivir is
primary
not
thing
a
that needs to be told out loud is remdesivir is not the life-saving drug.
Yes, sir. It's not
Sure, sir. In
yeah,
the trial
studies all
results
are
also
saying that no
shown it clearly.
mortality benefit. No
No
mortality
Yes, sir.
mortality
benefit.
Exactly. There is no mortality benefit for
But
It
remdesivir.
still,
only reduces the severity of the symptoms.
severity.
That's
Severity,
all.
hospital
It,
stay,
also,
all
it only prevents the patient from getting onto the ventilator if you start
Severe
it
stage,
early
yes.
enough, so that the virus that's causing damage to the inflammatory cascade can be prevented and delayed. And if he is good enough with his good immune system, he can come out of it. You have any data on that, Amal?
Yes,
You want
sir.
to
Yes,
show
sir.
some data?
Yes, sir. So
I have one more question.
Yes, sir. Sure.
In this time, we are seeing a lot of COVID negative SARI, severe acute respiratory illness. So, and in those patients, do you think remdesivir has a role? Because nowadays I see remdesivir being asked for patients who are COVID negative, but they present with typical symptoms of COVID and all that. So
So
not the CT, not the RT-PCR, but they have a severe acute respiratory illness. So what is your take on that? Whether
depending
these
on
patients,
the clinical probability of whether the patient has the infection or not, sir. Whether it is presumed to be significant infection, COVID infection, which is become significant. So we have to take it like that. So patient
so
is
it's individualized.
yeah, swab positive or swab negative does not matter here, please.
The
No,
clinical
yes,
probability.
severe
But-
acute respiratory infection without any evidence of
COVID.
RT-PCR positivity or any evidence of CT. If the CT also does not show any
Hmm.
telltale classical evidence of COVID, I don't think
Then
there
I
is
think
role for
Yes,
remdesivir
sir.
in such patients. Because if the patient is in severe acute respiratory illness, he is almost close to getting onto a ventilator. That means he is in a phase of inflammatory cascade. The inflammatory cascade sets in and that becomes very active. In such places, you have to think of other things like steroids and other drugs rather than thinking of antiviral in that situation. I would not give antivirals to such patients, remdesivir to that patient.
Most
Okay.
of the RT-PCR negative patient will come later only. That's why most of them would have crossed that viremic. Even their COVID, they would have crossed. Most of them RT-PCR negative, they will roam around. They think some other, they will delay. Only the
Yeah.
positive patient will run to us. Other will be waiting. They will be keep to repeating the test all
That's
that.
why
Most
I
of them would have
see
crossed that period.
correct.
Benefit of remdesivir period.
In this way, I'm seeing patients being presenting late. I still feel there is some kind of COVID complacency among our
Presenting late
patients.
and presenting with swab negatives also.
No. You have to differentiate. There are two important points which you should give. One is COVID patients not doing an RT-PCR with a CT evidence staying at home. That's one aspect that if you are all referring to me, these patients, if they come on day 5 or day 6, there is a role for a remdesivir in such patients. But if Ajay was asking a question where the RT-PCR, you thought of COVID, but the RT-PCR is negative and the CT scan also is not suggestive of COVID.
Definitely no, sir.
There is no role
Definitely
for
no.
remdesivir.
Definitely no for remdesivir because
For remdesivir. You raise a very good
Remdesivir.
point. See, many people don't turn up. They do a CT scan of the chest. On day one, I see many patients keeping a CT scan with them and coming to the clinic, and they show CT scan showing some corax. They themselves read the report and tell you also, So they would not have done an RT-PCR, and they are afraid of doing an RT-PCR. Sometimes, for some reason, they don't do RT-PCR. Such patients worsen and come. I think there is a role for remdesivir in these patients if they are not sick enough to go on to an NIV or a ventilator. That is a role.
And-
And some other
and
category, some
presenting early also.
patients, yeah.
And
Once
presenting early also.
RT-PCR positive, immediately they're doing CT test. It will come as normal only. Again, after 4-5 days, their saturation falls. They are saying or CT normal, why saturation falls. They are unnecessarily thinking of pulmonary embolism, all this. Most of them by 7th day, 8th day, their CT becoming worsening.
I think that we have to organize a separate webinar altogether to follow the timing of CT in COVID. I think that's a huge topic.
Yes.
I think we should.
Multiple
Exactly.
CTs and all that.
Exactly.
When to repeat CT, when to do first
2-3
CT, when to
CT
repeat
scans
all
are there
this.
with the patient now.
Yeah. Imaging in COVID is
Again,
going to be a separate
patients will
topic.
start becoming hesitant to take CT scans.
Yeah, because of that.
Too much exposure also. Yeah.
Yeah. What's this remdesivir data you have? Quick data, is it? I think we are running
Yes,
out
sir.
of time. Yeah.
Two studies here, sir. The first study is the study which I mentioned yesterday, ACTT trial. This study showed that the time to recovery is significantly decreased. That there is an increase in the when the patient is start on oxygen, the oxygenation increases and does not mortality, and it should be started significantly when the patient is presenting itself. Preferably within 10 days of symptom onset. And second and the third study, sir, Green et al. And the third one is Goldman et al. Those two studies compared 5 days versus 10 days. Sir. The present treatment thing is when the patient has not shown significant benefit when treated with 5 days of remdesivir, you can give 10 days, but it's not mandatory.
So the take-home point is remdesivir is not a drug which you should think of when the patient is on mechanical ventilation or when you're thinking of ECMO and so on. You should never use it. You should use it in a mild to moderate case where the patient is likely to deteriorate and worsen, or the CT scan is showing extensive opacities, but the patient is good enough to come to hospital and get into the hospital. I think only in those patients you must think of remdesivir.
Yeah,
And
sure.
it's enough to give 5 days. There is no need to continue remdesivir beyond 5 days. The trials have not shown any extra benefit by continuing it beyond 5 days. Next, what's our next this thing? Plasma.
Tocilizumab.
Plasma? Tocilizumab, yeah, that's again, yeah.
Another IL-6R antagonist. Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the studies concerning with this are previously the tocilizumab was tested on several trials. There are proven to be significantly harmful, and it was not proven to be beneficial. The studies concerning where this RCT, TCZ, Coriminotox, and the third one is the Covacta. But when studied with trial of recovery trial on February 11th, 2021, they said that it decreases mortality and decreases chance of discharge. And the second trial is a REMAP capital. So this trial was done on greater than 2,000 patients, and study result showed that it decreases mortality, decreases the patient ventilation, and the side effects are associated with tocilizumab are serious infection, hypercholesterolemia. The current indication is when the patient is presenting, admitting, and within 24 hours, the patient is in the significantly sicker and is in intergigarium. So those patients need tocilizumab, and deterioration of the oxygenation within 1 or 2 days.
Amal, I'll tell you that tocilizumab is an excellent IL-6 receptor antagonist, but it is now out of stock. And third most important is it has thrown out of the tocilizumab was thrown out of this COVID treatment guidelines because of this severe immunosuppression and causes a lot of infection, because we used to think of tocilizumab at a later phase. I think we all remember one of our patients herself who had a severe emphysema where we thought there was a talk about the toci. We said it does more harm than good. Yes. We should not start tocilizumab. Now it has come back into this thing because if you can identify the patient deteriorating very fast within 24 hours, right under your nose, there is a case for tocilizumab to be started. You can give the tocilizumab because that means the inflammatory cascade has started very fast in such patients. Very severe COVID, category C COVID starts from day one. In such patients, there is a role for tocilizumab. Otherwise, tocilizumab has got no role at all. The later you start coming after remdesivir, starting tocilizumab, day 10, day 11 on a ventilator. I don't think tocilizumab does any good in such patients. That's my take on it, and even the data supports only the use of tocilizumab in the first 24 hours only. Anything else you want to add on that, Sridhar?
Yes,
And yeah,
Amal has given that the Covacta and Roche has said no benefit of it, the tocilizumab. Last time we stopped using, like you said. Now again, they started using in the severe cases. Those are, like you said, acute percentage, very acute. Suddenly they are the cytokine storm. Those patients they started using, but still the availability is less. In that case, only whether the itolizumab can replace the tocilizumab, that's my because their studies have shown some of its mechanisms are similar to tocilizumab.
Which one?
Itolizumab.
Itolizumab, sir. Itolizumab.
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 Whether,
Itolizumab, yeah.
it can
I
be
think
used as an
some more
alternative.
trials
sir.
have to come, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Itolizumab.
Which is the action, everything is more or similar to tocilizumab, sir. It's binding on CD6 receptor. It's instead of blocking the signal of IL-6, it's just down-regulate the signaling of IL-6. In addition to tocilizumab, it also down-regulation IL-2, TNF, alpha, interleukin 17 also, which was not done by tocilizumab. So these are extra, and it has longer action. Weekly dose only, weekly once. They are giving an infusion, and if needed, they are repeating it.
Yeah.
But when we are talking about tocilizumab, we should not forget the complications or the tocilizumab associated side effects that happen in these patients. It causes increased predisposition to staph of pneumonias, which led to the
Pneumococci.
development of pneumococci in adults, if I'm right.
Yeah,
A
sure.
lot of
Sir.
pneumococci
Yes,
in
yes.
adults with
We have
staph
seen in
pneumonias.
several patients.
Several patients we have seen, and tocilizumab by itself is known to cause lung fibrosis. There's a separate entity, tocilizumab associated lung injury, if I'm right, TALI, tocilizumab associated
sir.
lung injury. So that COVID causes post COVID lung fibrosis. To add to that, if you give tocilizumab, I think we have to be very judicious in using tocilizumab again. It's
Yes,
not
sir.
a simple drug where we can.
So it has,
Yes,
that's
sir.
all. Now
It's
it has
not
got
in
a very clear-cut indication. Within first 24 hours, if the patient, 24 to 40 hours, if the patient is deteriorating very fast, there you think of tocilizumab as one of the drugs. The alternative to tocilizumab nowadays, as I said, the Mayo have, this clinic have done that. Your dexamethasone can be given in a dose of 20 milligrams for 5 days and then 10 milligrams for another 5 days, which has more or less a similar effect as tocilizumab. So rest said tocilizumab probably is not there after 10 days. After 24 to 40 hours after that, it got no role at all. We'll go on to the next.
Yeah, sure, sir. So
Yeah.
next is
On
convalescent
plasma,
plasma.
there was a lot of fanfare when it came to when people thought that nothing else is. This came only because in the first wave, we never had any drugs. Especially in New York, when there were a lot of deaths that were occurring, people thought that we can try convalescent plasma as a mode of treatment. And then people realized that the antibody stays only for a small period. A lot of studies were done. A lot of data has been accumulated on convalescent plasma. And most of this data says that there is not sufficient evidence to say that it is of good use. Maybe useful in people who have B-cell deficient diseases where they cannot produce antibodies. Maybe they'll be of some use. Maybe they'll be very useful in the early phase when the virus is just getting in. Virus has infected and patient is developing this in a very early phase. It has got a role, but it has absolutely no role when the patient is again on a ventilator. As I said, when he has crossed the viremic phase and has gone on to the inflammatory phase, that got no role. Maybe we can decide on these patients to think of plasma. Maybe, I don't know. We check antibodies and then see. Still, I am not very convinced that plasma has a major role to play, and that's been the opinion of most of the studies across. What does this study say, JAMA? You have collected some
All
data?
the studies, sir, are done in this aspect, sir. In the JAMA study, RCT study, and the second study being Concord study, and the third solid studies, recovery trial also. It did not prove to be beneficial at all, and it is associated with a side effect also, TRALI.
should be
Right.
given within 3 days. It's recommended to give within 3 days, right?
Early
All
onset,
we
yes, sir.
give.
Yeah, it's not possible at all. Most of them will come third day or fourth day only. They will do the test at third day, fourth day only.
So
And
it's
the
of,
variability of
you don't see them
the
at that stage
plasma
at
also
all.
is
Yeah.
Now in this present wave, we don't see the patients at this. In the early phase, that time they were rushing to every patient was considered COVID and they were checking, and then we were they were giving this plasma. Nowadays, I think they come a bit late and it doesn't become of any use to us. But you can't call it as a drug that is of no use. It is a useful drug in some select situations. You can put it as. Yeah. Next slide.
Next is the anakinra, sir. IL-1 antagonist. So
Yeah.
there was only one study done in this aspect, sir. Cavalli et al. The thing is, it was a single center study, sir, retrospective cohort study, which was done in very small numbers. It was proven to be beneficial, but further studies are needed in this aspect, sir.
Yeah. But we don't use it at all. They are removed from the guidelines now because
Treatment
of the lack of
guidelines, sir.
data.
Only in the
Yeah. Next
clinical
slide.
trials it is there, otherwise
Yeah.
it's taken from use.
Yeah.
And concerning these drugs, sir, like Sridhar sir, you said that itolizumab may be of some use in this patient. So the thing is, all the studies done in these drugs, sir, be it an infliximab, adalimumab, bevacizumab, itolizumab, they are all very small numbered studies, sir. It was not a powered study, and a few treatment reports were there, case reports were there, and the problem with those is there was no proper outcome analysis, whether it has improved the mortality, it has improved the oxygen. So
they have been
further
taken
studies
out
are
of
needed in
the
this
thing,
aspect.
Yeah, taken out. Yeah. Go on to the. Yeah,
At
we'll go
present,
to the next.
clinical guidelines are yes, sir.
Yeah.
So this is a new one, sir.
But they are included in the
Casirivimab,
recovery. Yeah. Yeah.
Casirivimab, yes, sir. Casirivimab, Indalimumab, sir. So the thing is, sir, this is an antibody, two drug mixture, sir. It was considered to be beneficial in patients presenting significantly earlier, mild cases. It is presently in the treatment guidelines, NIH treatment guidelines, and it is under trials, recovery trial. A single dose we have been giving.
But
Right.
it's not on hypoxic patient, right? Before that, mild patient.
Yeah, before
Yes,
it's all
sir.
mild.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir. Mild
most of these
patient
drugs, yes,
presenting early.
yeah,
Early, very early.
early, very early. Right.
Casirivimab 700 mg, Indalimumab 1400.
Yeah.
And the second drug which is having same mechanism. So pamla, this has been taken out of use. And baricitinib. So baricitinib is the present fascination.
Yeah, it's a present because I think they say baricitinib is useful only when you are using it with remdesivir. If you
Yes,
use
sir,
it
exactly.
without a remdesivir, it has got no role at all. Again, it is the same indications as remdesivir, but the only difference is it causes a better recovery. If you combine baricitinib with, I don't have much experience. We just started on one patient today on baricitinib.
Yes, sir.
What does the data say?
Data, they're using it for
Janus kinase inhibitor. Janus kinase inhibitor, sir. The biggest trial is the Jalil et al. So the thing is, in this trial, it is shown to significantly increase the time to recovery when combined with remdesivir.
What's your thing, Sridhar? You're telling something?
Yes, the same thing. The NEGM has published this data, right?
Yeah.
Same one, right? And it's a 4
Same
mg, 4 mg for 14 days, along with remdesivir alone.
Oral drug it is.
Yeah, mostly
Yes, sir,
patients on HFNC and NIV patients are getting benefited, they're saying. Not in the severe patients. Previously, also another study has COVID something, COVID barrier. That also
Yes,
has
sir.
shown some benefits. That's a
Monotherapy
not
trial is
mortality, no mortality benefit. All this is increase the time of viral
Only
clearance,
time to recovery.
increase the time of recovery.
And the treatment guideline is the thing is baricitinib can be given for patient who are at present we are unable to give steroids because of some reason.
Yeah, that person recommendation is instead of steroids we can use
Yeah,
Instead of
remdesivir.
steroids,
Along
we
with
can-
remdesivir.
if patient is not suitable for a steroid.
Steroids. Yeah.
So baricitinib, just to add a small information, it is acting as an anti-inflammatory and it has antiviral properties as well. So there was an artificial intelligence study which was done on liver, a 3D model of liver spheroid, where it shows the antiviral activity. So though the major clinical evidences come from the ACC2 trial, where, as Dr. correctly said, it is done in combination with remdesivir. So in that case, 1,033 patients were being enrolled in the trial. So both the activities, that's the reason it's an upcoming molecule.
Fine. And
As of now, Monica, baricitinib is useful only in combination with remdesivir,
Yes, sir,
and the
yes.
role is more as an immunomodulator rather than as an antiviral. Actually,
Right, sir, right.
we are using
and
it in combination with remdesivir. We are using it, and I also checked with one of my colleagues in Mayo. They are
Right.
also using it in combination with
combination.
and it's because if it is an antiviral, they must have tried it as independent drug in one of the arms. I don't think it has been tried like that. It's
Also.
tried, but it has not been shown of any great benefit. Steroid, of course, that is a point. We are not able to start these patients on steroids. Yes, baricitinib with remdesivir is a good choice in such patients.
So I just have
Yes.
one question here.
Yeah.
Yes.
In case, like for baricitinib in normal rheumatoid arthritis patients, it has caused to, it has led to adverse events like increase in platelet count and decrease in leukocytes. So in COVID patients, generally the leukocyte count is decreased, and thrombosis is also a common adverse event we see in COVID patient, a common complication we see rather. So, sir, in those cases where you're giving baricitinib plus remdesivir, how frequent does these laboratory parameters need to be frequently checked, or how that is supposed to be managed, sir?
You have to monitor them. The baricitinib can cause has this side effect. The important side effects are hyper this thing. Platelet counts can this thing go up. That's a known side effect of it, which has been observed in many rheumatoid arthritis patients. And this has been tried only in a trial basis only. And in the trial, this has not been mentioned in the trial. This has not been mentioned as one of the side effects. But any drug that you start them on, we keep monitoring them with CBC and the liver function tests on a regular basis in these patients. And once that happens, we got to think of other alternatives.
Okay, understood, sir. Understood. Kindly go ahead, please.
Yeah. Next.
Yes, sir. So next is the inhaled budesonide. As Sridhar said that two trials concerning this. The first one is STOIC trial. So the STOIC trial has shown that the symptom recovery decreased by 3 days if started early, this budesonide inhalation. And this inhaled budesonide should be used in patients who are having mild disease and who are having significant comorbidities where we can't start systemic steroids. So in those kind of patients, budesonide inhaler is better. And the problems associated with this trials, STOIC trial, the trial has been funded by the pharma company itself. So that is the first limitation, and the trial was stopped early, sir, before the sample size was met. So they didn't have a proper symptom analysis, and the trial was only based on serological conversion. It was not based on biomarkers. It was not based on hospitalization. And the second trial is being started now, sir. Principal trial. Now this budesonide inhaler has been started in the patients who are 65 plus. Trial is underway now.
Actually, Amal, you mentioned, right, that inhaled steroid can be used in those can't be used systemic steroids. I think it won't be beneficial. Systemic steroid can't be replaced by budesonide, definitely.
The trial model is a bit fledged.
Yeah, systemic steroid, when we are going to use hypoxia,
In
that condition,
actually.
yeah, in that condition, budesonide won't be useful.
Will not be of any use.
Yeah, yes.
And
So I think
budesonide
will be useful just to treat a bronchitis, viral bronchitis, as with the budesonide with bronchodilator like any LABA, SABA. That's how it's going to helpful. Otherwise, it's not as going to prevent the viral replication or disease progression. I think so, sir.
And my personal thing is that giving 1,600 microgram of budesonide only increases systemic side effects and predisposes for fungal infections.
That fear is not a very big one, because compared to the dexamethasone dose, budesonide dose is very less. The study was on in a very early phase of COVID. When you start them, the recovery is slightly better. I think we have to see some more patients, some more data is needed on this trial, budesonide, inhaled budesonide trial. I don't think there is.
I think the principal trial will
may throw some
throw in
light,
some
some more
light
light
in
on
this
that
aspect.
actually.
Yes.
So this may not, yeah. Then next,
This one is colchicine.
Yeah.
Colchicine
again the
is
same point, no, for rheumatoid arthritis they're using. As I said, we tried a lot of these drugs that are used for HIV and also used for rheumatoid arthritis, thinking that they may be more for immunomodulatory effect. We tried, and the Corona trial has said that evidence does not support the regular use of colchicine as an outpatient drug in even in mild COVID patients. I think that's the conclusion of that Corona trial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Next,
And colchicine is associated with side effects also, sir.
yeah.
Bone marrow
Yeah.
suppression, neuromuscular toxicity.
Yeah.
All these important side effects.
Yeah.
2-deoxyglucose. Now the present DRDO recommendation.
Yeah.
2-deoxyglucose. Now there are only few such small studies are there. Prevention of fibrosis in patients who are previously affected by COVID and who have been affected by severe COVID. 2-deoxyglucose may prove to be beneficial. They are not sure about the results because there is no study in this regard.
No, there are studies. It's a very small number of patients.
Anecdotal
have been studied
references
in
are only
that.
there.
And there is no print data available on that. And they said they have done some phase 3 trials and the data is not available. But it does some work by getting into the cells and preventing the viral multiplication. But one of the side effects is it can cause hypoglycemia. It can cause severe glucagon. It's a desi glucagon. It can cause a severe hypoglycemia, deplete the cells of glucose, and thereby the virus multiplication is prevented. I think some more data is needed. As I always say, any new drug without any harmful side effects, you can just give a trial. Budesonide is one such. You can always give a trial because we have been using budesonide left, right, and center in our asthma and COPD management. If it can help in COVID, I think nothing wrong in giving a trial. Let us wait for the principal trial data.
Sure, sir. If it can prevent post-COVID fibrosis, better, sir.
Yeah. Then the next.
Oxygen.
Yeah. I think oxygen we should have a separate. It's one of the life-saving treatment of disease. A lot of things are there in that. We should have another very big. This is a 1 hour this webinar we must have on this. But suffice it to say that we must see all the methods before we go on to the ventilator, the nasal prongs, the HFNC, the NRB, and the NIB, and then the ventilator, and then the tracheostomy, and after that is the ECMO. So all these methods, whatever we are doing, is the best. If you are starting these patients, or if you are keeping these patients on home isolation, if you are keeping, or in some hotel isolation, the best advice that we can tell these patients is to go on prone. Even if your saturation is 92, 93, advise him to sleep on prone. That's one way of increasing the oxygen in a natural way. And of course, there are other methods. I think we will discuss it in another webinar, oxygen. But oxygen is the most important part. If the patient is symptomatic, oxygen has to be given to such patients. Yeah. Next we will go for
Anticoagulation, sir. So the present treatment guidelines for this.
Yeah. What's your take on that? When do we start? Whether you prefer aspirin or whether you prefer this is subcutaneous heparins, low molecular heparins.
Inpatient thromboprophylaxis only treatment recommendation, sir. Inpatient thrombophlebitis only should be given, sir.
All
Yeah.
hospitalized patients need to be
Outpatient.
started on anticoagulation.
If an
But,
outpatient
my
with a
question is
high
outpatient.
D-dimer levels, is it? Do you start
Yes,
the
sir.
patient?
Yes, sir. High risk patients, old age patients, those are mostly on bedridden, and like you said, high D dimers, oral anticoagulations. I'm starting, sir.
Like what?
So like Paxibam or Rivaroxibam.
Oh, directly you go. Okay.
Outpatient
Not
also.
aspirin, not
You don't want to start
antiplatelets,
aspirin or
not
clopulate.
antiplatelets. Yes, sir. Not antiplatelets. I'm just starting on this one, oral anticoagulations only.
No, if
Not
the
even-
patient is ambulant, my question is the patient is ambulant, mild COVID, and smartly does the blood test and comes to you with a D-dimer that's elevated.
Sir, if
That's what he says. He'll start on rivaroxaban.
D-dimer is more than 2 times. Very much elevated. I'm going for this. Sir, mild elevations, I'm not recommending, sir. Because
No,
part of
what is
The
the
inflammation,
role of,
recommendation is you start only on patients who are
hospitalized.
inpatient and who are, like you said, immobilization
Hospitalized.
and so on
Yes.
only. If the patient is ambulant, even when I'm discharging the patients also after 2 to 3 weeks, we can stop if he's ambulant, he's mobile, means there is no need to continue the oral anticoagulants. Another drug that's being misused and overused in the post-COVID situation. A lot of anticoagulants we are using.
Now it's not.
And
Yes,
like
sir.
Ajay was
Demand is there,
asking
sir.
about aspirin and clopulate, people are combining. I am not comfortable combining aspirin, clopulate with apixaban. People are coronary artery heart disease who are on aspirin, clopulate. You get into the hospital, do a D-dimer, and they find a D-dimer that's elevated. They also start on anticoagulant. I don't think that's a good practice. We should not
increases the risk
combine
of
both.
bleeding.
Either it should be aspirin, clopulate, or this has to be a low muscle dependent. That's what the guidelines is all about. Yeah. Next, ma.
So the current treatment recommendations, sir. So strongly for is systemic steroids patient who are at present start on oxygen or on ventilator, and strongly we should not give chloroquine, systemic steroids for patients who are not hypoxic, and like previously we have spoken about, sir, azithromycin, lopinavir. All these drugs should not be given. There is a conditional for recommendation for starting on remdesivir patient who are on support of oxygen. Tocilizumab for patient at present is very invasive ventilation, and there is a conditional against treatment recommendation for starting on remdesivir patient who are on ventilator and starting on colchicine also.
What's to be seen in this slide is strong. In the strong for box, you don't find remdesivir, you don't find
Exactly, sir.
tocilizumab,
It is a conditional recommendation.
you don't find any of these azithromycins or doxycyclines and so on. So strong for is only systemic steroids in oxygen bar ventilated support. It's a strong for. And strong against you have everything. Conditional for only you get into these remdesivirs and those, which means in an outpatient treatment, I think Amal should have mentioned, the only thing that has switched is only paracetamol. Nothing else. If the fever has got, patient has fever, paracetamol. If the patient has bronchospasm, sodium and acibrophylline, cold, antihistamine. Only symptomatic treatment for the RS. None of the antiviral. You don't even find favipiravir also in this list. You can see that. You don't. It means polypharmacy should not be indulged in the management of COVID. And then I think we have Ajay a couple of slides on surgical management. How do you, if you have a patient who needs surgery, what are the guidelines?
I don't want to put up slides because we have been going through a lot of slides. See, as surgeons, we face many problems. One, the surgery can be emergency surgery or an elective surgery. First, we'll see about elective surgery. In the US and UK, and I think most of the parts of the world, elective surgeries were put on hold for most of the part of the pandemic, most of the time where we had the pandemic, because there were a lot of logistic reasons. The number one being the non-availability of staff, medical personnel and nursing staff were not. Then finally, when the American Society of Anesthesiologists and the CDC, they got together, formed few guidelines, and our own ICMR also issued some guidelines. And then we restarted the elective surgery sometime around September on a routine basis. So at that time, what were the recommendations? What are the problems that we faced was first pre-operative COVID testing. A lot of patients were very reluctant to get themselves tested for COVID. Amal, can you stop the slide sharing so that I'll just be able
Yeah,
to move
sure,
the screen a bit?
sure, I will.
Yeah, correct. Okay, fine. So the pre-operative COVID testing. A lot of patients initially in the first wave, this time, not in this time, the first wave, they were very reluctant to get themselves tested for COVID-19 in the pre-operative period. So as a result, they were getting postponed. The elective surgeries were getting postponed. Number two, people were afraid to come to the hospitals in the first wave. So as a result, the elective surgeries were again getting postponed. Number three, the one important logistic issue that we faced were not all hospitals were equipped with COVID-19 testing facility. Now this is not the case, but initially when we started, the COVID-19 testing would have been done at some other place and the patient would be getting operated at that place. Then institutional protocols would dictate the patient would need to have a repeat COVID testing. So an interval of 3 days, 4 days was there, but the patient had to get tested repeatedly. So this was again a deterrent to surgery. And now all this has been sorted out because all hospitals have been given and able to test for RT-PCR for COVID-19 and abundant availability of personal protective equipment during this time. I think this was all sorted out in the last year and it's not a problem this year also. And most of the staff, the doctors, healthcare workers are trained in handling COVID patients and sterilization procedures have been streamlined to think COVID. So, but the other challenges that were faced were we had to have a priority and priority basis for the cases because over the past 1 year, a lot of cases, lot in the sense more than thousands of cases would have been cancelled over the period of 6 months. So these patients will all come this year again. So there's used to be a huge backlog, especially in Madras Medical College. The average waiting time used to be around 2 to 3 weeks for one patient to get operated pre-COVID. Now, all these patients, I think we had around 100, 150 patients and for surgery, posted for surgery, planned for surgery in the next few weeks. But once the government announced the lockdown and COVID and all that in the first wave, all these patients had to be discharged and sent. So when we started reopening, they all came back at a time. So this led to a lot of logistic problems and you had to prioritize these cases. Which patient is going to require emergency surgery? Which patient is urgent surgery? Which patient is going to require surgery that can wait? And depending upon the symptom classification. So this specialty prioritization has to be done for all these patients. Number two, the time allotted for each procedure and as identification of essential healthcare personnel. You need to have a capacity goal prior to resuming operations. In case your department needs to be involved in COVID duties as well, and some of you are going to fall sick in the middle, then I think again that is going to be a deterrent to your performing elective surgeries. So you need to identify your goal, endpoint, capacity goal, what you can do, and how many people are being supplied from your department to the COVID care facility. So that is there. There was a trend where daycare surgeries used to be preferred because they are less taxing on the system. You don't need admissions, you don't need patients go home early, and preferable to reduce the average length of stay in the hospitals. So all these were there. Number two, what are the ICMR guidelines with regard to preoperative COVID testing? In June 2020, all patients, asymptomatic patients, symptomatic, everybody undergoing medical elective surgeries should be tested for RT-PCR. This is the guideline that we also follow. Currently in our hospital, we take the RT-PCR that is valid for within a period of 4 days of elective surgery. However, there are some certain instances where asymptomatic patients have tested positive for COVID RT-PCR. They just swab positive. They don't have any symptoms with regard to COVID. The CT scan is normal. I'm a thoracic surgeon, so most of my patients come to me with a new CT scan. So when RT-PCR is positive, but the CT is not showing any evidence of COVID, we usually involve the pulmonologist also and get the recommendations. But according to the American Society of Anesthesiologists, the guidelines is you have to wait a period of at least 4 weeks for asymptomatic patients from recovery from only mild or non-respiratory symptoms, 6 weeks for a symptomatic patient like cough or dyspnea who did not require hospitalization, 8 to 10 weeks for a symptomatic patient who is diabetic, immunocompromised, or hospitalized, and then 12 weeks for a patient who was admitted to an intensive care unit due to COVID-19 infection. But for a
I'd like to
patient,
ask you one question, sir. Sir,
yeah, please.
some patients turn persistently positive. So, like we had a patient who turned
Yeah.
persistently positive for almost a
I was
year.
coming to that. Yeah, that's where the role of antibody testing comes in. I was just getting to it in the next part of my presentation. But the current, but all these are guidelines meant to guide us, and ultimately it is the individual patient, the surgeon, and the multidisciplinary team who is going to take care of the patient, involving the pulmonologist, the surgeon, and the intensive care person, and the ID people if they are available to decide on this particular patient. Currently, in our hospital, we follow a period of 2 weeks isolation following an RT-PCR positivity if he or she is asymptomatic, and then take up the patient for surgery. However, there are patients who keep turning up persistently COVID positive in spite of having finished their isolation for 2 weeks. We had a patient recently who required a surgery. However, most of the places she was deferred surgery because of her persistent RT-PCR. She became positive in, I think, August 2020, September 2020, and she continues to be positive even till now. So whenever she goes for an elective surgery, they see an RT-PCR, then she says she's positive, isolate her for 14 days, and now she was mortally afraid of undergoing any surgery. Then after a discussion, multidisciplinary team, we decided to do an antibody titer, and IgM was less than 1, and IgG was, I think, more than 60 or something. So in these patients, I think after careful counseling and involvement of team with the anesthetist, discussion with the anesthetist, the pulmonologist, we took her up for surgery. Such patients, in spite of the fact that they are RT-PCR positive, I think we should take into account the dead bacilli shedding. So not bacilli, dead virus being detected on RT-PCR. What is your take on that regarding the dead bacilli, dead virus which is shedding through the nose?
Narasimhan, sir.
Yeah.
If there is smear that is persistently positive and the antibody levels are pretty high, IgG levels are pretty high, I am not greatly concerned about that virus positivity. That's why the guidelines nowadays say that one need not check the sample again after 14 days to see whether it is infective or non-infective, or whether it's fit enough to travel or not. I tell them you don't need to check it. That's not the guidelines. Across the world, the guidelines have changed. Before and all, we're doing the test to see whether you are positive or not. I don't think you need to do that. If you are planning for a surgery, something like that.
Still holds in sick patients also, sir. Category C patients also, sir. That after 14 days, they should not
category
do a
C patients, no, it's a different ballgame. We don't think of surgery on them. We don't think of asking them to travel. So this question comes only in category B only, where the patient has recovered, is going home, whether you need to do a test and send him, or whether he needs a test to go for any work or something. No, there is no need. No need for such things. Yeah.
So what I was saying was, so these patients also will, we cannot deny surgery or defer surgery without a proper reason for these patients. I think, and number two, once we have done talking about elective surgeries, we should also see the economic impact it has caused. Because economic impact, although we say medicine and all that, it still has a great economic impact. In US, they did one study. Sorry, I'm just reading the results of that study. It was published in around August 2020. So the total annual cost of elective inpatient and outpatient surgical procedures in the US was estimated to be 147.2 billion, and the total reimbursement that the usually hospital receives was around 190 billion. This resulted in a great income. But during the COVID, the cancellation of all elective procedures would result in a loss of almost 17 billion per month for 17 billion US dollars per month for all the US hospitals, for hospitals who are doing these surgeries. So that may had a significant impact on the US economic system. I think it would have been the same everywhere. So, with great judiciously only we should cancel or defer any surgeries, not only because of the patient condition, we should also keep the other factors in mind before we take a decision like that, because it's going to affect the patient both mentally and things. Number two, we have emergency surgeries. Emergency surgeries, we have done quite a few emergency surgeries during the pandemic, especially foreign bodies. A lot of patients, I think, during the lockdown have a relaxed lifestyle, and most of them would have aspirated some foreign bodies when they keep sitting on the couch and watching TV while eating some solid things. So, such things like that. So, these patients, they are recommended to have an RT-PCR before testing, but you don't need to wait for the results. You have to go ahead and do the procedure with treating the patient as if he or she were COVID positive. So you have to take all the proper precautions and do the surgery, so that we have to think. But there's one tricky situation. What do you do if you take up the patient for surgery and they become RT-PCR and you come to know that he or she is RT-PCR positive in the post-operative period? It's an emergency surgery. You have done an RT-PCR just before surgery, and the result comes back to you the next day that he or she is positive. Then you have to shift the patient to a COVID care ICU instead of the normal ICU. Even before the results come, because you have treated her as a COVID patient, you have to keep her in a COVID suspect. So that's why I was telling you, the hospital or the facility, the institution where you operate has to have all these three things. You have to have a COVID suspect ward. You have to have a COVID negative ICU. You have to have a COVID positive ICU. So this intermediary ward is a COVID suspect ward where you don't know the COVID status of the patient, and you have to. This is like in between. It's like a Venn diagram, and this in the intersection of the Venn diagram. So we had a patient like that last year in the peak of the pandemic, the peak of the first wave, whom she was a case of severe bacterial empyema, who was in bacterial sepsis when she came in. Counts were almost 28,000 and through the roof, but we came back, her COVID results came back positive, and then she had a pretty stormy course. There are a lot of studies have proven that operating in patients who are RT-PCR have increased inflammatory immune response in patients, thereby leading to more severe conditions. Ultimately, she had a prolonged course in the ICU and spent almost, I think, 6 to 8 days in the ICU, and then she came out. She was discharged home without any problem. But you have to be very careful in such patients, so that you have to have a COVID suspect and then the COVID negative and the COVID thing. Apart from that, surgically, what is the relevance of a thoracic surgeon in COVID? Nowadays, we are seeing a lot of pneumomediastinum and surgical emphysema without any pneumothorax in COVID. I think that most of the pulmonologists, I think you all must be familiar with. And as a thoracic surgeon, I get pushed and I get literally so many requests and sometimes even ordered to put an ICD for such patients. But I would like to tell the doctors here, ICD in the absence of a pneumothorax is not going to be of any benefit to the patient. It is not going to reduce your surgical emphysema or a pneumomediastinum. Instead, it would be more useful and more beneficial to do an early tracheostomy, because the air is in the pneumomediastinum, it's in the mediastinum. So when you're doing a tracheostomy, you're automatically opening the pretracheal space and most of the air comes out. So it will be more logical and more sensible to do a tracheostomy, early tracheostomy, because most of this occurs in patients who are on a ventilator or patients who are about to get ventilated, even on a BiPAP or HFNC, who are requiring high oxygen concentration. So in such patients, doing a tracheostomy is going to be beneficial both from the patient point of view, because the oxygen requirement you might be able to come down on the oxygen requirements, and you might be able to wean the patients off oxygen. The tracheostomy is a safe thing. It's not as dangerous as we think. It can be, if done properly, it can be safe and sometimes life-saving in such patients. Number two, as we all know, the long-term effects of COVID, we are seeing a lot more and more COVID-associated lung fibrosis and all that. Ultimately, they might end up in ECMO or transplantations. And COVID-associated surgical complications, what we have seen in the last year, COVID-associated lung abscesses, especially in patients who have received tocilizumab. we see they develop some kind of nematoceles due to persistent staph aureus infection, and they turn. If it is restricted to one particular lobe and surgically resectable, we can go ahead and do surgery. But most of these patients are the disease is bilateral and the lungs are destroyed, and they come in a very terrible situation. So we are not able to offer any kind of surgical treatment for them. I think with regard to COVID and surgery and COVID and thoracic surgery, I
Dr.
think
Monica,
Mucormycosis.
are there any
Also
questions?
the role of surgery in COVID associated mucormycosis.
yeah, but I
There
have
are-
not seen any COVID associated mucormycosis.
Pulmonary
wait.
mucormycosis
There are a lot
is
of
common.
questions coming up in the chat box. We'll just get to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let us
sure,
have
sir.
Sure,
Monica,
sir.
anything there, ma? Any questions?
Yes, sir. Yes,
See,
sir.
fine.
Questions
Yeah.
are there, sir.
Yeah.
I'll just read out the first question.
Yeah.
So the first question is about remdesivir. Is it indicated in the early phase or the late phase?
Yeah, it is indicated
phase,
only in
definitely.
the early stage only, man, not in the late stage. That's why we very clearly said that when the patient is on a ventilator or when he is on a likely to go worsen from when he shifted, he was an NIV and he gets onto the ventilator, means remdesivir has got no role at all. That's why there's one question on viremic phase and inflammatory phase. How do you classify? So the viremic phase was one of the doctors had asked that question. I was just going through the questions. So one of the ways of differentiating viremic and inflammatory phase is in the inflammatory phase, all the inflammatory markers will be skyrocketing. Though we keep telling that they are of no use, but when you check this in about 10 or 12 days when the patient is ventilated, when you check and see, you will find CRP very high, ferritin levels very high, D-dimer size. All these acute phase reactions, when they go up, it means that we are in a phase of a dysregulated inflammation, and that needs to be attended to in a different manner rather than by starting these patients on remdesivir. There's no role. There is one question on pirfenidone, which is a better drug actually. It becomes a personal choice. He never, in my experience, COVID fibrosis is better treated with nintedanib than with pirfenidone because of various reasons. It is a tyrosine kinase inhibitor and the compliance is much better, and people already have some hypoxic liver damage in COVID, and you give this Perfenix to these patients, they have some liver injuries as well. Having said that, I must also make a mention here, the guidelines are not very clear-cut on the role of these antifibrotics in post-COVID fibrosis, because it is believed that this COVID fibrosis is completely reversible. It's only in a very, very small percentage of patients this fibrosis becomes irreversible. Most of my patients have gone back home on after 3 or 4 months. They have come back to normal, and they have some small scars in the CT scan of the chest. It is a story of people who have recovered with extensive fibrosis, who went on a tracheostomy and went back home on tracheostomy and got tracheostomy closed. We have a small percentage of people who had extensive fibrosis whom we lost. There have been instances of people doing transplants on such patients, but as of now, the data is not very encouraging on patients who have undergone transplants in post-COVID situations. Any other question you're saying, Monica?
Sir, most of the questions are being answered by the doctors during the discussion.
Fantastic.
Discussion,
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
So no new questions, sir.
No new questions there, no? Yeah.
No, sir.
Colchicine, we have answered.
Yes,
There is
sir.
one question on good and timely treatment of lung involving. These are all the questions have been answered. Remdesivir is indicated early phase. Well, one question. Role of antibiotics. Someone had asked the role of antibiotics in PV plus PF. The role of antibiotics comes only in the late phase. Category C only we think of antibiotics. We don't think of antibiotics in category A and B situations. That's why we kept telling that there is no role for these azithromycins and doxycyclines and augmentins and other antibiotics in the early phase of this thing. And how to manage diabetes, I think that they're all this. Anyone? I think most of it has been answered. Yeah, I think if everything else is answered means I think we'll wind up. I think the questions are coming up still. I think most of the questions we have answered. Most of them, yeah. Quite a
Yes.
number of questions that are coming up. Anyway,
Of them are late.
yeah.
They
Yeah,
can
questions
see in
will
the
keep coming.
see
It's
in
a
our
very
channel.
interesting topic always,
Yes,
So
sir.
questions can be. Yeah. I think you want to sum it up on behalf of foundation? We'll give it to Monica.
Thank you so much, sir.
I think it was a wonderful session. We had discussed about a lot of drugs and something about surgery, and I think we have overstepped our time. I know that, but it's a very interesting topic, and it's very difficult to limit within 1 hour. I would like to, at the outset, I would like to tell you that as a part of the foundation, Respiratory Research Foundation of India, we've been organizing these educational webinars to involve both the healthcare professionals and the public in a great way since the pandemic began, so that education is very important. And instead of spreading misinformation through WhatsApp and all that, we thought with some credible information needs to be thrown around so that people can get benefited. So to organize this, I thank the Lupin Respira division and especially Dr. Monica and our Lupin people, Mr. Sri Kumar and Mr. Sriram. I don't know if they are here, but I would like to thank them all. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank our panelists, Dr. Amal Johnson and Dr. Sridhar, who have prepared excellently, and they have gone through all the trials painstakingly without and have not minced any words and done a great job in collating all these trials. And thank you, Dr. Narasimhan, also for agreeing to host this session. So with that, I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Monica. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a great session indeed. And we got so much information. COVID is the burning topic at the current time and very interesting too. It's a lot of unexplored areas and a lot of reproposed drugs which have come into picture. Everybody is trying to hands-on on different kinds of drugs, and getting a perspective on the same is very, very interesting and difficult at the same time. I thank all the doctors who have taken out time during the time of this pandemic where we understand how busy hours it is for you guys. So thank you so much from the Lupin side, and thank you so much for being a part of this program. Thank you.
I would like to thank one more person. I think Imagica Health, I have only seen his logo from the beginning. He has also done a good job of streaming
Thank you,
this
sir.
on.
Yes.
Yeah,
Uninterrupted.
uninterrupted streaming has been possible by the people from Imagica Health. Thank you very much. I missed him out. Yeah.
Thank you, doctors.
Thank you.
Good night to all.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye. Yeah.
Bye.
I'm leaving. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Ankit, we can close the session. Thank you, Magica team. Good night.